From the Australian Taxpayers Alliance, this is Taxed and Wasted, a podcast about tax, regulation, and waste. I'm your host, Emilio Garcia. Hello and welcome to Taxed and Wasted by the Australian Taxpayers Alliance. I'm Emilio Garcia. In a little bit, we're going to talk to the ladies of Pantsuit Politics. They run an incredibly successful podcast in America. It is a conservative woman and a liberal woman who come together to talk about different issues. I have to apologize. I've been traveling and the room that I found to interview them in was just very echoey on my end. I totally understand if you want to skip this one, but if bad audio quality isn't very triggering for you, then check it out. That'll be at the end of the news review. But getting to the news review, this is going to be a coronavirus-heavy episode, so I'm going to try to keep it brief. We don't really know much yet. We don't know enough to start speaking too articulately on the coronavirus threat. But before we get to coronavirus, I want to talk about the ATO. Now, you may know that we here at the ATA are not big fans of the ATO. But the ATO has been at it again, demanding taxes that they're not entitled to. So people are receiving notices saying, you owe us X amount of money, usually over $1,000, and you have 2 weeks to pay us back. You have 2 weeks, and if you don't, then there'll be consequences. You'll get penalized in some way. And so people, naturally, with the time that they have, they don't really have a time to take it up the ladder. They don't really have time to say, this is inappropriate, I don't want to pay this, or I actually shouldn't have to pay this. But then it turns out, pending an investigation, that a lot of those taxes, the taxes that the ATO said Australians needed to pay them, they weren't entitled to it. They got it wrong. They sent out a letter saying, you owe us this amount of money. And they didn't owe them that amount of money. The Australians receiving the money and many times paying from their wages that amount, they didn't have to. They weren't legally required to. So clearly some reform is needed. Maybe shutting it down, though. That's probably not feasible. But definitely the ATO should be rethought. Getting to coronavirus news. So ScoMo has announced a $22.9 billion economic stimulus package. It's there's a lot of different layers to the plan, but what a lot of people are focusing on is the $750 cash payment to certain people. So this is mainly for pensioners and welfare recipients. There's also going to be some subsidies for some businesses, but more than anything, the big story here is a cash handout. Now we have to think about, Emily Dye, our policy director, did a really good deconstruction of ScoMo stimulus package, but she brings up a great point. She says, we're going to give pensioners, people over 60, we're going to give them $750 cash to go and spend. We're encouraging them, the government's encouraging them, not to put this in savings, but to go out and spend it. Here's the issue. There's a pandemic. There's a pandemic that affects people over 60 the hardest. We've seen this in the statistics. People who are severely affected by coronavirus tend to be people who have underlying health issues or that are above the age of 60. And so it's odd to say to these people, the most vulnerable people, hey, there's this virus that we don't really know what's going on with it. It's spreading a little bit faster than we once thought. It affects you guys over 60 more than anyone else. So we're going to give you $750. We want you to go out into the public, where there are crowds in shopping centers and spend this money. Really? Don't you think we should be encouraging them to stay home? Clearly, I mean, obviously the welfare recipients, they're most of them are probably young, so they can go and spend the $750 dollars without that much risk. But just Emily Dye did point out this issue, and I think it's a great point. I think it's a fantastic point. One of the things that I wanted to bring up is the stimulus package that the United States is bringing, which is just so different in kind from the one that Australia is putting out. And I think, we should take note here. Donald Trump is basically easing tax burdens on businesses and individuals. He's easing the regulations around sick leave and making it easier for employers to provide sick leave to their employees. He's basically making it so that employers don't have to pay payroll tax for a little bit, which obviously makes it easier for employers to keep employees there, even if the production and the consumption goes down. And I think it's just it's an interesting dichotomy to see just the difference between one approach, which is the government saying we're just going to allow the economy to function without the heavy foot of government for a little bit, while in Australia it's actually just spend, throw money at the issue, that'll solve it. Okay, well, I mean, you can decide which one is better. I would say, and I think it's the general consensus among people who are a little bit more libertarian-minded economically, would say that we shouldn't be throwing money at the issue. We should, in fact, be encouraging businesses to function without regulations from the government so that they can just do better from their own resilience. So one of the things that I just wanted to finish on is, since we're talking about coronavirus and since that's anything anyone wants to talk about anymore, I don't think it's very wise that to belittle the threat that coronavirus poses. I know that a lot of the earlier information we had showed that the death rates were lower than the flu, and that it wasn't even expanding very quickly, and so few people have died. And for a while, it was appropriate for people to say, meh, not that big a deal. This is totally fine. But I think the time for that type of blasé attitude has ended. I really do. In Australia, we've seen a 41% increase in the amount of coronavirus cases in the span of 24 hours. Now, that obviously has more to do with Australia's ability to test people for coronavirus than people actually just getting the virus at that pace. But we still have to be cautious. I think it's very important not to want to belittle the issue. We've seen Italy basically shut down its country. We've seen China completely disrupt its economy and its supply lines for this. We're seeing Donald Trump today, possibly. This is being filmed on a Saturday in Australia. I'm here in Mexico City. He's going to declare a state of emergency, probably. There's travel bans in place. Here in Mexico, we're running out of medical equipment. And so while I don't think that panic is ever a good move, and for the love of God, stop buying toilet paper, I really don't get where that came from. I don't think that it's an appropriate or intelligent measure for people to say, it's just a flu, because it really isn't. Can I just get back before we finish and we move on to the Pantsuit Politics interview? It was really incredible to see the the empty shelves for toilet paper in the toilet paper department in Kohl's and Woolies, while the rest of the shelves were stocked with long life carbohydrates, canned foods, freeze-dried meats. All of this was readily available. Everything that you would need, things such as toothpaste and certain basic commodities, just completely untouched. And yet, for some reason, Australia thought that the most important thing was to hoard toilet paper. All right. If anyone, by the way, who went out and bought some toilet paper, can you please get in touch with us and let us know where you heard that you should buy toilet paper and what your motivation was? Thank you very much. We're going to move on now to the interview with the ladies of Pantsuit Politics. Once again, I have to apologize for the audio quality on my end. If you're particularly triggered by echoey, not great recordings, this is one you can skip, but I suggest you don't, because it's interesting. All right, I'll see you next time. All right, Beth and Sarah, thank you so much for joining me on Taxed and Wasted. How are you?
Great. How are you?
Oh, good.
Oh, I'm so happy to hear it. I'm wonderful. Thank you for asking. So, we don't have a ton of time, so I'll just jump into what I want to talk to you guys about. The Australian Taxpayers Alliance is nonpartisan, which means that we really like to affiliate and work with whoever wants to forward our agenda as we see it is best for Australia. And so I was really interested to see that you are both creating a podcast or have created a very popular podcast that really shows both sides of politics. So, it's a bipartisan podcast. And I don't want to throw gasoline on a fire or anything, but I'd like to ask you both why you think your side is the proper one to be on as opposed to the other. So one of you is a liberal, the other one is a conservative. Why do you think your side is better than the other?
I don't know if it's that we think our sides are better than the other. We just have different approaches, and our fundamental value is that both sides belong at the table. So we always say, when it comes to the federal government, Beth is the brakes and I'm the gas. I just think if we can bring the power of the federal government to a problem, why wouldn't we? And she's always the one sort of advising, hey, wait, that doesn't always turn out great. Whereas when it comes to the private market, I'm the one who's like, I don't want the private market to just show up and solve all our problems. That doesn't always turn out great either. But the thing about gas and brakes is that you need both to drive a car. It doesn't work if one person's foot is all the way on the gas and all the way on the brakes at the same time. That's not how you go anywhere. And that's sort of what's happening in American politics right now, is that you have both sides refusing to give anything, and so there's all gas and all brakes about every issue, with neither side wanting to let their foot up off the pedal at all.
Yeah, I agree with you completely.
Yeah, I would say that it's hard to know what both sides means in American politics in 2020. The complexion of things has changed significantly since we started the podcast. And I'm not sure that my perspective is represented well by either of our major parties at this point. I've always considered myself conservative because I think that we should solve a problem as close to the problem as possible. And so for me, that means an emphasis on, yes, businesses bringing their expertise to problems, but also local communities, county governments, state governments, looking at our giant federal government as a problem solver of last resort. And that's just not an approach that either party in the United States is reflecting very well right now. But I completely agree with Sarah that there are certainly constraints on my perspective and limitations to the effectiveness of that strategy. And so that balancing impact, where you have one party focused on what are the benefits of federal government as problem solver versus the limitations, is the recipe for the most effective form of governance. And I think its absence is why we feel so frustrated with our Congress and all of our institutions right now in the United States.
Sure. Yeah. No, I definitely agree, and I think it's no secret that both parties have gotten more ingrained in their beliefs. Bipartisanship has definitely gone down, and it is kind of a winner takes all situation. But on this topic of bipartisanship and having both sides of the table, I want to ask what you think on this issue, which is, how much should each side be willing to give up in the name of stability? In other words, we will need to compromise in order to work together, because we all have our different opinions. So how much can you give up saying, well, at least I'm really more or less achieving what I want to? And where is the line where you'll say, well, I'll go no further than that?
I think it's a tough question because I think you are framing it exactly as we frame it often, which is, I must be giving something up. When sometimes it's not even that we're giving something up as much as we are accepting the world as it is. A lot of problems that I feel the pressure of Sarah's kind of perspective on are new problems. When I think about climate change, it's really difficult to say, well, let us hunker down in our local communities and deal with climate change. That's the world dealing us a new situation that's probably going to require a different kind of approach. At the same time, we have in America built some federal programs that I would not have initially signed on for. I don't think I would have voted in favor of Social Security or Medicare when they were formed. But lots of Americans rely on those programs. And so is it giving up something for me to have an interest in stabilizing those programs, keeping them solvent, keeping them functioning? I don't really think of it that way as much as just meeting reality where we are.
Okay. And Sarah, did you have a point perspective on this?
No, I mean, I think that Beth really nailed it. That the issue is not that it's this false binary that everything is a scarcity sort of approach, that in order, and it's the winner take, you mentioned this too, it's the winner take all composition of our elections that carries through into our governance. Just because we have winner take all elections and somebody has to win in order for somebody else to lose does not mean that's the case in every single legislative or policy issue. And I think kind of trying to keep our focus on that instead of letting the partisanship of elections infect every single conversation we have.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And although I really wish that was, I am in Australia currently, but I am an American, and it is sad to see the polarization within our parties and with our political class have it just goes so far. But I do wonder, since we have the ideal that things should be a little bit more give and take within our politics. But the situation on the ground currently is that, both sides are going for everything, and they're having a hard time agreeing on anything. And so if you do think that both sides should be at the table, that there should be a give and take, that you don't want to necessarily look at it as a winner takes all issue, how does that work within a situation such as this, which is to say, you as a person, let's say on the right, think that the left stands against everything that you want to achieve and for a lot of things that you oppose, and a similar thing would apply to the left. So how can you really work civilly with someone that opposes really everything that you want to achieve?
Well, I would start from a lens of saying, is it really everything? Can I be a little bit more honest about it than that? And if I can't, then how can I at least prioritize? Because if I have decided that the stakes are as high as humanly possible about everything from climate change to tax policy to symbolic resolutions, the kinds of things that we pass all the time in Congress that don't mean a whole lot, but that pronounce something about how we view the world, I'm not going to get anywhere. So can I rank my issues? Can I at least say, here's what I think is most important? Maybe if I'm on the right, that's some kind of free market economy, right? And so I've decided I will hear you, left, when you say that healthcare prices are too high, that not enough people are insured. And I will also say that I do not think the government taking control of the delivery of healthcare services is appropriate. That's a hard line for me. So how can we work together on finding a way to stabilize prices, lower prices, make health insurance more accessible and affordable, while maintaining a private system around healthcare? But instead, right now, we're having a conversation where we have like problem identification from one party and problem denial from the other party. The right would emphasize problems around religious liberty. The left would say those problems are non-existent. It's all bigotry. The left would say we have a healthcare crisis. The right would say, not really. And the same thing with climate. So I think instead of just outright denying the version of reality where we're starting, prioritizing what really matters to you around each issue could help us meet each other somewhere where there might be some fruitful decision-making or creation solution. Or solution creation.
Absolutely.
Well, and I think that part of the issue in the way people approach it as if, this is fundamental, I can't give an inch, is because we're asking partisan politics to encompass the entirety of our identity, and that sort of team identification or that tribe or whatever you want to call it is supposed to hold all our values, all our experiences, all our identity, and it's not built for that. And when we approach it that way and we we treat every issue as if it is the end of the world, and the stakes are so high, then we can justify all sort of terrible behavior in the way we treat each other, terrible policy outcomes. And I mean, that's what you see play out over and over again in American politics.
Yeah, definitely. And on the subject of American politics, bringing it, obviously, the elections are getting more and more heated, even though it's still hundreds of days away, the election is. What do you think the current candidates, including Donald Trump, are doing right? And what do you think that they are doing wrong?
I mean, I think that it depends on how you define right or wrong. I mean, if we're talking about what are they doing right to further their success as a candidate, I think that Joe Biden is doing a lot right as far as gathering endorsements, using the momentum to the best of his ability to unify the center to center left in the Democratic Party. I think Bernie Sanders is doing a lot right as far as energizing and moving the party itself further to the left. And, as Donald Trump, I think the Republican Party under his leadership has done a lot right as far as taking more advantage of technology in ways that they weren't doing in previous cycles, and gathering big amounts of information and data to create these voter files that I think any party in the 21st century is going to need to be successful. And you see them doing that in ways they weren't before Donald Trump. So I think there's something as far as electoral success you can see on in any of the candidates. As far as what I think right, as far as like good for the American political environment, I don't know. That would be a tougher question to answer.
Yeah, that's
I mean,
perhaps
I think he's. I'm sorry.
No, I was just saying, yeah, you're right. Electorally and maybe strategically, that's an interesting question. But when you're talking about how this benefits the American people or the American political system, how do you think both sides are currently doing?
Well, I was going to add to Sarah's answer that I think you see three really different visions for what the president does, what the role of the presidency is supposed to be with these candidates. And I think that's a segue perhaps to talking about what you're asking substantively, what's good for the country here. I think in Senator Sanders' campaign, there is something important for the country in terms of honest reflection about who is being served by the American economy and who isn't. Who's being served at the expense of others in the United States, and what can we learn about ourselves from that honest critique? I think Joe Biden's campaign is serving the country through asking us to take a hard look at our values. Biden started his campaign by talking about what happened in Charlottesville and has really said to America, we are not supposed to be a racist country. We are not supposed to be a country that turns away immigrants. We are a welcoming nation. We're better than this, is kind of the Biden message. And I think that's a good one that America needs right now. I think that Trump views himself and the role of the president as kind of appealing to the other shoulder of Americans instead of that critique or that sense of let's get it together. Trump wants to say America's amazing and you should feel amazing about being an American, and America should be at the top of every trade deal and the top of every world order. And so kind of boosting the American ego. And I think that, whether I love this or not, you see a lot of people in America who were hungry for that kind of message, that there is something special about being an American. I think because we've lived through so much problem identification over the past decade, there are folks who wanted to hear somebody kind of give them that pep talk, and that's what Trump delivers for a lot of people in this country.
Yeah, certainly. Well, I find this incredibly interesting, and I really want to thank you both for taking the time. And since we are reaching the end of our time, I just wanted to ask you both a quick question. Feel free to not answer this fully, but I would find it interesting. Who are you supporting from the candidates? Do you guys know who you're voting for yet?
Well, I plan to vote for Joe Biden. It will be the first time I've voted for a Democrat in a national election. to me, Trump has just taken us in a direction in terms of our national ethos that I think is unhealthy. And I think Biden strikes a good compromise between being critical about areas where America needs to do better, but also hopeful and optimistic about what we can do well. And I'm encouraged by all of the support lining up behind Biden in terms of just building a really competent administration again. So I know that he is to my left on many issues, but I think that he represents a good compromise that we need at this particular moment in our history.
Okay.
Cosign.
All right.
Everything
Perfect.
she just said. Except for the first time I'll be voting for a Democrat. I've only ever voted for Democrats.
Sure. Okay. Well, I love it. Hey, thank you so much again for taking the time to talk to me. I've really enjoyed it. I'm sure our listeners will enjoy it as well. And I'll hope to talk to you soon.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.